meet you over Zoom, I guess, Ella, and I'm hoping I meet you one day actually in person in real life.
Yes.
But thank you again for doing this podcast. Thank you for rescheduling last week.
Yes.
And I'm going to hand over to you to do an intro, but I thought just to mention that you are Ella Hugh's daughter. Ella is sorry, you are Lisa Hugh's daughter, Ella.
Yes. Yes.
Elise is
Yes.
obviously very well known in the Bitcoin ecosystem. She's just joined Custodia Bank, and I interviewed her about, I think it was 2 weeks ago today. So I'm really pleased to have you on as well. And you've become quite a force to be reckoned with in the Bitcoin world, and particularly with your demographic. You're doing some really great stuff at your university. So I'm excited to talk to you about that as well. But I think with that, I'm just going to hand over to you first to introduce yourself, and then we can kick off with a discussion.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Krista. That's very kind. My name is Ella Hough. I am a junior at Cornell, and outside of school, I am the project lead at Generation Bitcoin, and one of the co-founders of a new group called the Bitcoin Student Network. And at school, I do a lot of Bitcoin education within the Cornell Blockchain Club, and just in everyday interaction. So, such a pleasure to be with you, Krista. Thank you.
Nice, great to have you on. So I really like to just start off with your Bitcoin journey, because obviously with your mum being
Yes.
in the Bitcoin space, I guess you've had a very decent amount of exposure through her. But can you talk me through like when you first found out about Bitcoin and when you became so
Yes.
passionate about it?
Yes, absolutely. So I kind of always say I first kind of found and discovered or learned about Bitcoin and then discovered Bitcoin. So when I was a senior in high school, which was about 3 years ago now, I was enrolled in a class just titled Blockchain. And at the time, this was also kind of when Gary Gensler's MIT, blockchain and money class was happening. And so I was in both of those. And just learning about Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain, and honestly, it went completely over my head. I had no appreciation for Bitcoin specifically, what it is, what it does, what it allows for. So that was when I first learned about Bitcoin. And then that was very from kind of the number go up perspective, more just blockchain generally. And then about a year later, I went to the Oslo Freedom Forum with my mom. And I think that is when I really discovered Bitcoin, as a tool for human flourishing amongst many other properties of it. And I think that's when I really became a Bitcoiner. It was Bitcoin, not crypto, Bitcoin, not blockchain. And then from there, that was kind of like my freedom go up stage. And I think now I've also just, being in the Bitcoin space, it's almost like I've called it a knowledge go up. Bitcoin teaches you how much you don't know about pretty much everything. And so I really come to appreciate that as well. But that's kind of my orange pill story, I guess maybe three parts ish. But my mom and I kind of fell down the rabbit hole together, but she was the Bitcoiner first. So yes, it's been such a lovely journey.
What made you do the blockchain course then? So what was the reason for you being interested in that?
Yeah, so the high school I went to, Miss Porter's, they have two kind of certificate programs that they, offer to students. One is a global studies certificate, and one is called the Technology, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship Certificate, which is what I chose. And so what that means is basically once you start at the school, so I came in my sophomore year, so I had 3 years there. You spend 3 years taking classes, and then in your senior year, you do a capstone project. And so the idea is that you kind of specialize in one of those strands, so either technology, innovation, or entrepreneurship. And then for your capstone project, it's a group of three, and you have one T person, one I, and one E, and you create some project. So I chose the innovation strand. And so within that strand, there were a lot of different classes you could take, blockchain being one of them. And so that is how I really found it. And then I was in that class, and I think my mom told me about the MIT course on OpenCourseWare. And so, yes, that's why I found it.
Hmm, that's fascinating. You've gone kind of really hard down the rabbit hole now. So, I mean, you're involved in so many different projects, but I was just hoping if you could go through
Yeah.
some of them. So, can you talk about, like, for example, the Bitcoin Student Network? When did you
Yes.
co-found that? What was the reason for doing it? Like, what was that journey?
Absolutely. So this, I mean, we finalized the proposal the end of October, It's kind of been in the works for a couple of months, but essentially what it is, we really want to foster a global network of Bitcoin students and clubs, university clubs, to help connect students with opportunities and resources within the Bitcoin ecosystem, and just promote, Bitcoin education and collaboration. And the reason I think this kind of all started, actually, it was a very kind of happy accumulation of a lot of reasons, but one of them being my own kind of story. I'm in the Cornell Blockchain Club, but I'm the only Bitcoiner. I've thought I've been the only Bitcoiner on the campus, but actually last week I found an MBA student. And then I think a couple weeks ago, there's also two researchers in like system engineering who just published a paper on how Bitcoin is a positive for kind of the ESG energy story. So anyways, the idea is there's probably all these students who maybe there's just one of them in their community, in their school, where they're on, the Bitcoin mission, but they're just one. And maybe you feel a little isolated, or maybe you feel discouraged, or like you can't, come together to learn more or work on some project or really feel like you're a part of something. So the idea with the network is that maybe you're just one person, or maybe there's a couple of you and you want to start a club, but being one person, that's a ton of work to start a club. So where we come in is we can kind of help you with any founding materials you might need. So, activities you could do, kind of a guide to start your Bitcoin club. Also connect you with, like, let's say you want to, read some Bitcoin book, like in your club. Well, maybe we can connect you with the author who could come and do a Zoom, or you need funding for an event that you want to have. Maybe we can help you with that. So basically, kind of consolidate resources to just better spread Bitcoin education and the message across Gen Z worldwide. So not just in the US, we have members all over the place. So that's,
I guess that was
going to
be my
yeah.
that was going to be my next question. Like, where are your nodes?
Yes. So it's kind of growing. It seems like almost every day. I'd say we have many nodes in Italy with Bitpolito. They really were super instrumental in kind of getting this started, along
What's
with Lucas.
Bitpolito?
It's in Italy. They're kind of like a Bitcoin education in college. And I can maybe send you the link if you want to, add it out. But so there's Italy, there's Mexico, Japan, there's Japan and El Salvador, another just in Japan, all across the US, countries in Africa, other places in Latin America. So it's growing. And hopefully we'll have a website launching next week. And the idea is that we'll kind of have a map where you can see where all these different nodes are. So yes, it's very new.
I was going to say, have you talked to Nathan Day at BTC Maps? Because that would be a good one to add there. I know that that's more for shops that accept Bitcoin, but is that an option?
I'll write it down. I think everything could be an option. So yes, no, thank you for that. Yes,
yeah, I mean, it'd be great, because if you can just brand it so that people know that in that location there is one, if they're in that particular area, then they know that there's a node for is it called the Bitcoin Student Network? And you don't have a website, you said, yet. Then so if somebody wants to join, who's listening, who's like, oh, I really want to sign up, and I'm at university, I'm a lonely Bitcoiner amongst all the shitcoiners. Where should they go?
Well, you can reach out to me just on Twitter at 21million for the 21st. But we will have a website next week, ideally. I think it should be next week or the week after. It's coming very soon. So it'll be there soon, and there will be a way to kind of reach out to us through the website.
Yes. Nice. I love it. That's amazing. Who did you co-found it with?
Oh goodness, there's like 30 of us in the Telegram. But it's kind of it's a huge group effort. It's definitely not just me. But it's the Gen B team. So Arsh, Malu, Mashana Misra, Autumn Domingo, and I can share more about Generation Bitcoin as well. And then there are kind of the leaders of the groups in Italy I mentioned. Also, there's Zach G on Twitter is his handle. He's at the University of Victoria in Canada. There's Will Owens at Vanderbilt. There's 30 of us. We're kind of all spread out.
How did you guys find each other then? like how did you end up kind of coming together? Because if you're all at in disparate locations and countries, what was the kind of unifying thread that brought the team together?
Yeah, so Lucas Ferreira, who he just organized SatsConf and many other things, he was kind of the spearhead leader. And then I feel like I wasn't at the origin of this Bitcoin student network, um, but he kind of gathered everyone. Also, Arsh is a super connector. And so I am sure he had something to do with getting everyone in. Um, so yeah, it's just now I've had people reach out to me, and then I add them in, so it's kind of, you get one person and they have friends and you just meet people at different conferences or other people meet at conferences and it grows.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So what else? My gosh. So okay, so Cornell has its own blockchain club. So what's your involvement in that then, other than being the lone Bitcoin voice?
Yes. So my primary role this semester is that I was the head of the recruitment process, and then I kind of lead and teach the new member education process. So essentially,
Hmm.
you have all these people that join the club, but you want to make sure that everyone is kind of on the same page education wise on all the different topics. Or at least try your best. There's so much to learn. So basically, what that means is every week for 8 weeks, I either teach a lesson or kind of have another person in the club come in and teach. Um, and then I also help plan the conference in the spring. And then I also, this semester, have tried to organize a lot of Bitcoin events, and tried to cover it in different areas. So we had Lisa Nagit, who runs Base 58 and Blockstream, kind of master technical, just great educator as well. She came and did a session on Zoom. So that was kind of like maybe a more technical area. We had Wolf, which is a Bitcoin and Lightning accelerator in New York City. Brian from their team also came and did kind of a presentation. So maybe there's a consulting accelerator side there. And then we had a panel with, it was a screening of Stranded, the new kind of Bitcoin energy film. And so we had Troy
Of the
Cross kind
prequel,
of
we should say the prequel because the full film
prequel.
is not
Well, yes,
out
well,
yet.
actually, and also
Everybody's
I,
so
so
desperate to see the full film by the moment. I cannot wait for it to come out. I
yeah,
am so desperate to see it. And this
yes.
prequel is like Alana's just stringing us along.
Yes. Well, also, I think so. I think I was under the misinterpretation that it was a prequel, but when she came to the panel as well, and she introduced it, and she said, this like Stranded stands alone on itself. It's kind of a chapter of the story, um, and so that was very special to be able to show that. And we had a great panel. And then, so that's maybe the energy side. So I've tried to organize kind of a diverse range of events and topics, because one of the greatest things about Bitcoin is that, all 8 billion people in this world will come to Bitcoin for a different reason. And so, there's not just one correct way to come at the topic of Bitcoin. And so I'm trying to bring in kind of diverse array of topics within Bitcoin, and, expose people to areas maybe they didn't know about. So yes, there's a lot of kind of education in the club. And then I tried to propose an independent major in Bitcoin. I've written some letters to the board of trustees and the president of the university. I also
Go on, go
applied
on,
and
tell me how
then,
that went.
yes, I think it's, so far I haven't had much success. My door is still open. Proposed an independent major last fall. I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences, and one of the very nice things about being in this college is that you can propose an independent major. You kind of write up a proposal, have some conversations, select courses that you think would fit under it, and then they either kind of approve it or deny it. And I got more to the deny stage. They were more so, why do you want to study something that's only, 14 years old at the time? Wouldn't you find more benefit in studying the gold standard? Or, when I went to faculty sponsors, they would say, oh, but we really think blockchain is the true innovation, not Bitcoin. And Cornell has very, very large ties to Avalanche, just blockchain more generally. Cornell Tech in New York City does a lot. And so there hasn't been much success there. I wrote some letters to the trustee and president and kind of describing why I think Cornell would stand to benefit from, having a positive stance on Bitcoin, and kind of very rooted in kind of the history of Cornell, why it makes sense. And I just got an email back that says, we're not really available to talk about this, but have a nice summer. So I'd also applied and
Could you
interviewed.
organize a
Yeah.
demonstration?
Well, so I applied and I interviewed to give a TED Talk, because we have TEDx Cornell. And, I guess I kind of failed in this sense because they said, we love the topic, but we need more of a narrative. College students sit in lectures too much, and we feel like they don't want to come to our conference and listen to more lecture style talks, and that they needed more of a like, who am I in relation to Bitcoin? But I guess maybe that didn't come through as much because I feel like Bitcoin just isn't about the singular person. It's, not just about you. I think it resonates with you for a different reason, but it's not about the individual person. So anyways, we'll try again. But I was like, oh, this is the perfect audience. It's all college students who really need to know about Bitcoin, or at least to hear it in a, honest and truthful manner, not what they find in the media. So we'll see, but trying many different ways to kind of spread Bitcoin knowledge on campus.
Wow. We're so early still. I mean, that's really crazy to me that I get like maybe they've got different incentives, but that really is wild that they're like, we're more interested in blockchain stuff. Oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, I keep hearing this. I mean, it's the same thing. I came from TradFi, and I'm just like, show me one successful blockchain project. Like, show me one. And yet there's like just this deployment of resources and narrative and conferences and this and that. Oh God. Anyways, okay. But okay, fair enough. So I guess you've had a lot of experience right now, both in your peer group and your university and other organizations. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, can you talk about your experiences trying to orange pill? Because you've obviously had lots of different attempts with different personas, if you like. What's been your experience, and do you have any suggestions for people?
Yes. Yes. Okay. I feel like I go many different directions. I think I've had the most success in the smaller groups, like when it's really just me and a friend. The conversation goes very well. I think it's much more, I mean, everyone says this, when you can talk to someone, one-on-one, it's, you can really hear what they're curious about and kind of talk in a way of, what they care about, what they're concerned about. So I think the more personalized it is, the more success you have. I think in terms of the classes that I've taught, so I've taught kind of new member education, and then I also help teach. We have an intro to blockchain class that's an official course. It's 4 credit that students can take. And so I teach some lectures about Bitcoin and different topics within Bitcoin in that. And I think
how well attended are they, out of interest? Like, do you get many people come, or like what's the level of interest?
Yes, so the course enrollment used to, I want to say at one point there were maybe 100 students, but that was when it was like the peak of the market. And now I want to say there's maybe 10 students in the class. So it's really dropped. It fluctuates. But I think one of the main learnings from those environments is that before you even start talking about maybe Bitcoin or energy or human rights, you have to just, I don't know if level set is the correct term, but actually explain the topic you're talking about. So what I mean by this is I did a lecture on kind of Bitcoin and energy, but first I wanted to explain, well, like, what is renewable energy? Not that I'm an expert, but try to just present the topic area that we're in. And so I think maybe this is just me, but sometimes I dive in too much first and kind of like go into Bitcoin. I have all this prior knowledge context, but maybe they don't. And I remember when I was first learning about Bitcoin, I think this is pretty generally, sometimes we just don't know what questions to ask. If Bitcoin isn't addressing one of our immediate pain points, maybe we can't appreciate all that it is because we just don't know that the issue, the issue that we're even talking about that we're solving.
Yeah.
And I think
I mean,
that's
I'm
why,
embarrassed to say that I learned about Bitcoin in 2011. My husband told me about it and he sort of lost
yeah,
interest initially, but initially he was very enthusiastic and said to me, "Oh,
yeah,
there's like this distributed like ledger and it's like it's amazing, blah blah
yeah,
blah." And he sort of explained it to me and I sat there politely listening and then I was
yeah,
like, that sounds really boring. And I worked
hmm
in TradFi for 20 years, and it wasn't until I
yeah,
left and it was a Jordan Peterson interview that I watched that my mum sent me, weirdly, who's not a Bitcoiner. And I
yeah,
was like, oh my God. And it was just like the veil of ignorance lifted. And I'm like, this thing has
yeah,
been sat in front of me for like, well, at that point, it was 10 years. And
hmm
I just hadn't understood it. And God, it's mortifying when you realize you're like,
yeah,
how did I miss the point? I think that's the thing is it's not the technicals of Bitcoin. When you understand the
yeah.
application and like what the point is, then it's suddenly like, oh, bingo, I've got it.
hmm And I think there's a lack of, I've been thinking recently, like, why am I the only Bitcoiner? What topic areas am I interested in that maybe other people are not? And the club itself, because this is like my main reference point, a lot of them are math CS oriented. I'm not. I'm studying cognitive science. I think I've just been interested in history for a long time as well. And I feel like people my age, we just, by purely because of our age, we just have a lack of historical knowledge. And so I think what I'm trying to say is that Bitcoin teaches you a lot about how the world has worked, or um, just topics that came way before us. And I think once you can at least start to know that or understand some of that, you start to gain a greater appreciation for Bitcoin. And I feel like crypto is very um, I don't know, like future oriented. Not that Bitcoin is not, but I mean, it's just so high time preference just generally. Um, but I
It's
don't know. I'm still
interesting though
working
that
through this thought
it's
process, but
interesting that the blockchain people have this sort of math background, then they're not as do they not appreciate sort of the like mathematical beauty of it?
so no, I'm sure they do. So a lot of them I think realize that, Bitcoin is the best store of value, or at least they get that, but they just think everything cool or interesting is going to happen outside of Bitcoin. And so that's why maybe they're attracted to the others. I don't know, because I'm also very interested in the whole numbers topic of Bitcoin. Not that I'm a math genius, but it's just an area that I find pretty fascinating or enjoy learning about.
Yeah,
Um,
I did actually really want to talk to you about that. One thing I would just say, the bit of piece about your generation that's interesting was when I was
yeah,
working for the Bitcoin Collective, they stood up the UK's first Bitcoin only conference, and we were
okay,
trying really hard to bring students to the conference in Edinburgh.
yeah,
And it was like pulling teeth. I mean, the
hmm
lack of interest from the university faculty, the student groups that were like crypto slash blockchain. And in fairness, we were trying to promote it. I think it was like over August, September, because the
mm,
conference was in October. So it was a difficult time period
yeah,
because people are either on holiday or then they're coming back and they've got just a whole mountain of stuff to do when they get back
hmm
to university. But I was astounded by the lack of interest because, I'm of a generation, I'm aging myself now, but when like, the internet had become a thing when I started university and we were all in the
yeah,
computer lab on chat rooms trying to learn how it worked, super excited.
hmm
And I just don't see that level of excitement in about Bitcoin. And to me, I find Bitcoin like having lived with the internet now for like half my life, I guess, and
yeah,
having then learned about Bitcoin, I think it's more interesting than the internet. It needed the internet to kind of happen, but it's more
hmm
interesting than the internet, I think. And I'm just astounded at the lack of enthusiasm that I've seen in the student population. And I don't know. I mean, do you think that that's what it is? It's that it requires some kind of a historical, like an interest in the arc of history to appreciate?
yeah. I mean, this is real. Everything I say is kind of just speculation, and I'll preface, I'm very bullish on Gen Z. I think we are very curious, very forward looking. There's a couple different areas. I feel like there's
You
so
better
much
be almost
demand.
screwed if you're not.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of demand on our time. Um, and I think in many instances we've made, and I've did this myself, I've kind of outsourced to others, what should I think? What stance should I have? Because I mean, just if you have to, learn every single topic, you can't physically. You can't do that. So we kind of, specialize, whatever, outsource what opinion we should have by, sources we trust. But I think with Bitcoin, you really have to think for yourself. And I really don't think it's a lack of interest, because a lot of people my age, they might be interested in crypto, in blockchain. They see it as something interesting. And so I take that as a sign of at least kind of self-selecting into what's next, like taking some initiative into thinking differently. But I think a lot of times, maybe and financial education is just not taught to begin with. If it is, and they think about investing, maybe it's, invest in what you see value in and what you use and what you like. And if, you have all of these crypto, coming to the schools to talk, saying, here, we're going to airdrop you tokens, here, build on our blockchain, here, be a campus ambassador. Well, then, like, you're going to go where you're wanted. And Bitcoin has no marketing department. It's the best qualities of Bitcoin also just make it really hard to reach this generation. And so I don't think there's one singular answer, but I definitely don't think I think people are interested.
It's a shame. It's a shame to me, because I feel like people, I mean, I never went through the shitcoin phase really. So I find it interesting, but I think my reason for not going through it is because I came from TradFi. And when I looked into it, I was like, okay, so Ethereum is basically like TradFi on a blockchain, and I don't see the value prop. Like, I really couldn't see the value prop. I was like, nobody was able to explain to me why this thing was. Nobody was able to explain to me in a satisfactory way why I should care about Ethereum. The value prop for Bitcoin was very obvious to me from the outset when I understood it, when I had that moment. But it's a shame in some ways, because I feel like people get led down this path with Ethereum where they waste months, years sometimes tinkering with something that, I'll be honest, I think is just organically going to implode. I mean, I don't think there's and I know a lot of people in the Bitcoin community are sort of quite angry towards it, and I think, yeah, sure, it's not a great piece of technology, but it will implode because it can't go in any other direction really, and it's already doing that now. But it is a shame in some ways, because I think people get enticed by it, thinking that it's flexible, they can do smart contracts, they can do NFTs, they can do all of this stuff, and it seems like a much more interesting proposition for some reason. And then they get kind of sucked into this thing. And I still talk to people today who are like, oh yeah, I'm going to do a token. And I'm like, why? Like, why are you doing a token? Why are you not using the Lightning Network? Why are you not using Nostr? Like, all of these things, like, why aren't you looking at these technologies? And I sort of often get this tone like, oh, I've heard of that thing, but I didn't know what it was. And I'm like, oh my God. So it's a shame, because I think there's time wasted for an individual, but also as a collective, where we're not working on the best tech, to deploy.
And I think maybe as like a final consideration in, Bitcoin versus crypto, in the West, like, I'm incredibly privileged that I don't need Bitcoin on a daily basis, as a medium of exchange. I have always grown up with access to the financial system. And that's most of, my peers. And so I guess if you're thinking, okay, 3 use cases of money, then it's store of value. But a lot of us, we don't have our, nest egg that we want to invest. We're kind of maybe just had our first job, we're just getting it. And at the same time, everything is just more expensive. And so then, we're saving less. And so I think it's hard that in many cases, maybe we haven't yet been presented with kind of the solution or the pain point Bitcoin addresses for us, and it will happen. But it's just very important that the honest message gets out.
The good news is people will happen. People will have to understand Bitcoin, but the bad news is that it will happen, and people will have to understand Bitcoin.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
gosh.
Yes.
Well, okay, so let's dive into your whole numbers thing then, because you wrote an amazing article for Bitcoin Magazine that you shared with me, which was incredible. I just really enjoyed reading it. And I'll be honest, I was a bit blown away that I was like, she's just a student. Like, how the heck did she write this amazing thing? It's fascinating. So
Yeah.
Could you walk people through, I guess, your backstory as to why you became interested in that topic, like what your background is in terms of what you're studying and why that was relevant, and then just walk them through like the substance of the article, because I'd just love to dive into that.
Yeah, so to be honest, it has nothing to do with what I'm studying at all. Um, yeah, really nothing to do with what I'm studying. So I wrote this first. I was on the plane having just been at Oslo Freedom Forum, and we were flying home, and it just started as a note on my phone. I was just kind of, I don't even know what spurred me to do this, but I felt like I just kept hearing a lot of numbers in Bitcoin generally, and I thought it was interesting. So I just started writing them down. Um, and I guess to preface, why am I even interested in numbers? Um, I went to a Catholic school when I was little, from the kindergarten to eighth grade, and I'm not Catholic, but we had to kind of pray the rosary every week or go to chapel. And the chapel had really beautiful stars all on the ceiling. And I just had to sit there. I wasn't allowed to kind of participate in any way. And so I just would look up and start
Did you
counting the
did you get an
stars.
exemption because you weren't Catholic?
No, no, I still had to go. I just had to sit there. So I spent a lot of time, kindergarten to eighth grade in that chapel, not really doing much. And so in the chapel, there were really beautiful stars on the ceiling, and they were kind of organized in panels. And so basically, I would just sit there and I would count the stars. And it's very odd, but then, sometimes and if I'm like in the airport and you have like the recessed lighting, or I don't know, it just became this weird habit where I just like count things. I'm really not sure why I do this. Um, and then it just somehow it got into this number thing where it was like, okay, I'm just gonna like sum digits of numbers. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this. Um, but so I had that background, and then I had also taken like my first computer science
So can I
course.
just
Oh
ask
yeah,
you a quick question on
yes,
that though?
yes.
Like when you're counting these numbers, I mean, like it sounds to me like it's something to keep your mind occupied, but were you drawing patterns from what you were counting?
So
Like when you were counting the stars, did these things start to form some kind of a shape for you?
yeah, so actually, I should probably add some more context now that you've mentioned patterns. I wouldn't say I had any shape. Okay, so there's the numbers when I was little, and then I think I very much always liked like patterns and order and organizing. I wrote a college application. One of them was about how much I like patterns. Like in my mom's like wallet, I would always like organize all of like the bills, or like I don't know, it kind of drove her crazy that I would like take stuff and move it around and reorganize her stuff. But I used to do that. And okay, so this is kind of a jump, but I spent my junior year of high school in Beijing. And I first initially thought that Mandarin was just, an orderless kind of collection of lines, and that there was no real thought. Um, Actually, I came to discover that Mandarin is a very ordered, pattern-based language. There's, eight different strokes that you can write a character with. Um, every single kind of character in the language has a phonetic and a semantic component. There's different like radicals to tell you a meaning of a character. So it's incredibly order based. It's a very patterned language. And I was also taking my first computer science class, kind of learning about the ASCII code and binary just in general. So all of this to say, I then stumbled upon a quote from Tesla where the gist was 3, 6, and 9 are kind of the keys to the universe. You can unlock the keys to the universe through these numbers. And so I think I just had all of this in my head, because I went to Oslo after my freshman year of college. And so I had been continuing to take Chinese. I had had the computer science course. I saw the Tesla quote. I then was seeing all these numbers in Bitcoin. And I think it all just came together. I'd also taken a class on creativity and discovered that a huge part of creativity is combination, kind of combining different topics in new ways. So anyways, I don't think it was a very ordered progression to these realizations, but those were the influences. And then I started noticing that a lot of the numbers in Bitcoin kind of sum down to 3, 6, or 9. So what I mean by this, so 2016, or the numbers 0, 1, 2, and 6, I noticed that there's Executive Order 6102, and then the every 2016 blocks about, they check the difficulty adjustment. 21 million is 2, 1, and 6 zeros. And so I noticed stuff like this. And then if you sum, 6, 1, and 2, you get to 9. So I just did that for a lot of different numbers. And I was curious, what's the probability percentage of how much 3, 6, and 9 appear, and they have ended up appearing the majority of the time in the article. So really, I'm not trying to make any broad conclusion with the article. It was more just observations that I found interesting, and that was
I
a
find
lot,
it
but I guess
Well, I find
yes.
it fascinating because I sent you that article by John Vallis, but it was funny because when I started, I'll tell you my backstory to this and why that
Oh
article
yes,
just blew my mind a
yeah,
little
yeah,
bit. But
yeah.
I basically, this is years ago, I went to a conference. Somebody gave me a free ticket to some conference when I was in New York when I was working there. And there was a guy presenting there. He was called Juan Enriquez. And he's an investor, I think, in like biotech, but he had written a book
Okay.
called Evolving Ourselves. And it was
Uh-huh.
all just sort of talking about, kind of like the I guess the stuff that you would do to evolve yourself in it, but like biohacking, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
But he made, I mean, the book is really interesting. It's worth reading. But he made a comment at the end as an aside that I thought was fascinating, where he said, "What if all life is code?" And obviously, with DNA,
Mm-hmm.
you could argue that it is. And I don't know why, but it's one of those weird things that just stuck into my head. And I used to
Mm-hmm.
think about that phrase a lot and just like turn it
Yeah,
around in my head in various different ways. And then there's
yeah.
a whole backstory of other books that I've ended up reading since. There's one that a guy called Donald Hoffman that I read in, I think it was December 2019. And
Mm-hmm.
he's written this book called The Case Against Reality. So he's a mathematician and had
Okay.
proved that what we see is not real, like it's an interface. So, in the same way that when you
Okay.
write an email,
Yeah.
you don't see the zeros and ones, you just see what
Mm-hmm.
looks like a piece of paper. What he
Yeah.
argues, well, what he argues, but what he has mathematically proven is that we
Mm-hmm.
actually hide most of reality and we don't see the complexity. So we see an interface, which is like a projection of, and it responds to the way that we behave in what
Yeah.
he calls fitness payoff. So, if you do, like if you walk out, he said, I wouldn't walk out in the street in front of a car
Yeah.
because even though I know that what I'm seeing is not actually real in the
Yeah.
in the sense that I'm not seeing it as it truly is, that the
Yeah.
the impact of the car will be real in the sense that whatever it is having that impact on me.
Yeah.
But all of these things kind of just that book just disturbed me so much because for 10 days I was walking around and it was all I could think about when I was out doing dog
Yeah.
walks. Like everything I'm seeing is not real. What's actually here? Oh my God. Anyway, and then like fast forward to the Bitcoin journey. And when I started learning about Bitcoin, I was kind of like, God, this is really weird. It's like people get changed by exposure to this piece of code and it's just code. And why does it do this weird thing to people? And I started thinking back to Donald Hoffman's book, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, if we are not seeing reality as it is, and like back to Juan Enriquez's thing, if all life is actually code, and
Yeah.
let's I'm really going down the rabbit hole here now, but
No,
let's say
no.
we're in a simulation, and then I'm like, okay, so has the master architect, called the master architect what you want, taken that code, that Bitcoin code, and plugged it into the program, and it's now spreading and it's changing everything that it comes into contact with, like spreading like a virus. And so when I
Mm-hmm.
read your article and you were talking about these patterns about like the Fibonacci numbers and how there are all these similarities in Tesla stuff and everything
Yeah.
else, I was kind of like, oh my God. Because
Yes.
that's a lot of like, and then Tesla's comment about, you unlock the keys to the universe. And I was like,
Yes.
so I had
And
kind of started reading, I'd started Googling, going like, is Satoshi the second coming? Like I was Googling this stuff because I was thinking, am I the only person that's having these thoughts? Am I like going
yeah.
crazy here? And then I
Mm-hmm.
found that article by John Vallis and I was like, oh, relief. I'm not the
Yes.
only lunatic. So that's why I sent it to you because I was like, God, there's
Yeah.
like a
No,
real
thank you.
affinity there.
Yes. No, thank you so much for sending that. I appreciate it. I had never seen it before, but I feel like it should be required reading for Bitcoiners. I mean, it's long, but it's so good. Um, and I also have to give credit. So level 39 has also, I didn't see any of his 3, 6, and 9 before I wrote my article, but afterwards people sent it to me and he has a lot of great stuff. And then Michael Dunworth, he did a podcast with Peter McCormick on what Bitcoin did. And he actually said some things that you kind of just, or the same sentiment that you just shared. And he was saying like numbers are the only thing in the universe that actually declare their identity. And numbers are like the one common language everywhere. And I mean, this is a whole nother rabbit hole, but you know, that conversation he had really made me think, oh yeah, Bitcoin is the key to the universe. I mean, I know that was the title of my article, but no, like it actually is because of this tie to numbers, kind of, you know, unlocks everything.
It's fascinating. It's such a crazy, crazy rabbit hole. And I'm not a
Yeah,
mathematician. I wish I was, but I would probably be
yeah,
like a crazy person locked in my office, just running numbers the whole time. But it's kind of
yeah.
nuts. So what's your conclusion about that then? Or have you reached a conclusion? Like with those patterns of those numbers, if it is the key to the universe, what do you think that means at this stage of your rabbit hole
Yeah.
descent?
So I think my answer is in progress, but there's an idea that Michael Dunworth brought up, but I'd also learned about it in my classes this year, and it was basically the idea of bridge laws or kind of transitivity in sciences. So what this means is that you can take a concept in one science and maybe put, you know, have the same message but in a different science. So you kind of bridge over. And see if ultimately you can distill down to one science. And so I might have gotten that a little bit wrong, but he has a paper that basically says the equation E equals mc squared and A equals pi r squared are the same thing. So that's kind of, you know, showing to my understanding that you can have these core connections across different sciences or fields of study. And it's all because of numbers, I think is the general point. And so, if numbers are kind of the root of everything, and Bitcoin itself is rooted in numbers and not just any numbers, then Bitcoin is kind of the key to solving the hardest problems because it allows you to make connections in ways maybe you hadn't thought about before. So, I don't know if I said that so eloquently, but I think one of the greatest things about Bitcoin is it just allows us to, well, some of the different values, but it allows us to kind of think long term about really hard problems that we've had and connect all these different disciplines in a new way. And yeah, I think I need to
It's like
be
a
better
like a
at answering,
unifying,
but
yeah, like a
yeah, I think
unifying technology or unifying
yeah,
theory.
and it kind of just gives us the wisdom and the insight to solve the once unsolvable problems. And because it is rooted in numbers, it kind of allows us a key to unlock all these new areas, or way of setting. And so at the end of the conversation, he kind of says, we've been in this information age, but we are moving into more of an energy age. And I think, you
Mm.
know, kind of to tie to the John Vallis article that you shared, I took so many notes when I was reading that. But I loved how he was like, you know, Bitcoin is just a way to get information across truthfully. And I won't get this right, but he had such a nice way of phrasing how Bitcoin kind of aligns your consciousness. And I think it's just like a mindset shift in so many different ways. And then once you kind of, yeah, I'm not going to do justice his article, but anyways, I think Bitcoin has
I'll put
some,
it in the show
yeah,
notes so people can read it along with your article because I think they're good
yes, yes,
companions actually to and I'll look up the podcast as well because I haven't listened to that What Bitcoin Did one and now I'm like, oh my God,
yeah,
I've missed a good one. So I'm gonna go back
yeah,
and listen to that
yeah.
as well.
But yeah, but I think maybe the similarity across the articles and those is they both just talk about like a reorganization of our consciousness and how we value different things in the world. And just at the root of it, getting our messages across with as much of their meaning intact. And so that's some of the bridge laws ideas. And I think just language in general, there's, and not to go down another rabbit hole, but there's the concept of a bottleneck of language. And so um, when you have a conversation, just with us, we kind of, as the other's talking, we nod or kind of say, or maybe, like you might say to facilitate, yes, I'm understanding, or I'm confused, to all try to help the meaning of the conversation get through the bottleneck, because so much meaning can be lost. And so I think the main takeaway from John Vallis's article and the Michael Dunworth podcast is that numbers, as I mentioned, are the only thing that actually identify themselves, that actually retain their meaning across cultures, across languages. And so in that sense, they allow us to go through different disciplines, different cultures, different theories of thought, and hopefully just be able to transmit meaning and value in a way we never have before, because in the past we've just lost a lot of meaning. And I think also we've been very more high time preference, short term focus, don't have the ability to really stick with a problem for a long time. So there's many different factors at play, but I think that's a very long answer to your question. But I think that's
No,
how
it's
Bitcoin
really,
can really help us
yeah, no,
solve
it's
hard
fascinating
problems.
listening to you. I mean, it's interesting because I feel it was funny actually because I was
Yeah.
sort of diving into this whole like teaching Bitcoin to prisoners, and somebody had made a comment to me saying, "Is it a good idea to teach prisoners about Bitcoin?" And I'm like, Yeah, I think it is,
Yeah.
because there's something about the mere exposure to that code that does something to you. I think it kind of either shines a light on your
Yeah.
lack of integrity or it brings out integrity. But it does
Hmm.
something like you can't be exposed to the Bitcoin ecosystem for any length of time and not be changed. So
Yeah.
it's a very strange thing. I just find
Yeah.
the whole thing just such a mystery. It's interesting listening to
Yes.
what you're talking about as well, about how this sort of bridge theory, because I have a friend who got sick with sort of long COVID. She was very sick for a long period of time, still is a little
Yeah.
bit, but recovering. But during her recovery period, she couldn't work. And so she was just
Mm.
at home, like not being able to move around that much and doing other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she got really into astrology, like really into
Okay.
astrology, to the
Yeah.
point where it's like I can ask her some random off the cuff comment and she will immediately just off, like,
Yeah.
without like from memory, she'll start telling me about all of the planetary movements that are
Oh
happening
my
right
gosh.
now, what this means, how that, and then she'll be like, oh, because she did my chart a year ago. Um,
Yeah.
and then she'll be like, yeah, I think if I remember on your chart, there's this. I mean, just like an encyclopedic knowledge of this stuff. But she talks to me
Yeah.
a lot about a transition phase that humanity is going through right now, where it's moving from
Mm.
a very centralized power structure to a very decentralized one. And it's moving through a period of chaos and change, but it's actually moving to a higher vibration. And I'm quite
Hmm.
an astrology skeptic, but I just find it so interesting because when she talks about this stuff, I'm like, this stuff like really aligns with what's going on
Yeah.
in global politics, but also in the Bitcoin space. So it just seems quite weird to me. It's almost like there's a weird convergence of disciplines that you wouldn't
Hmm.
expect to align, that are just coming together in this really crazy kind of crazy way. Yeah, I find it fascinating, really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely wouldn't consider myself a biologist or, someone very good at biology, but all of the Brandon Quittem, and then I might pronounce his name wrong, but Dhruv Bansal from founded Unchained, he has some really interesting thoughts on how, Bitcoin and AI and like the metabolic currency of digital life. And it's fascinating. And it's just, every day I feel like there's so much I don't know, but I love. Um, so
Yeah, the
yeah,
Bitcoin space
exactly
is
what you said.
fascinating
Yeah,
because you've got all
there's
these
just
very
so
deep
much.
thinking people that are just really like delving into stuff,
Hmm.
who are fascinated by it. It's amazing. Can you talk to me then a
Yes.
bit about what's next on the horizon for you then? So, like, what are you studying at Cornell again?
Yes. So I'm studying cognitive science, which it's psychology, philosophy, linguistics, and computer science. So it's a very interdisciplinary major in itself. So that's my major. And then I'm doing an information science and business minor. So I kind of joke that I walk all around campus because my classes are all over the place. But I am really studying. Um, I want to be someone who can ask good questions, who can kind of seek questions over just looking for an answer, because I do think, as you mentioned, our world is going through some really big shifts and will be over the coming decades. And so I don't want to just kind of train my brain to what is known. I want to just be able to hopefully think about unknowns. and how to think differently, basically. And so, how do people make decisions, make just judgments? What is the interactions between kind of people and information? So, yes, basically, I just want to be a better question asker. And I think a lot of this started because I took a class on creativity in my freshman year of college, where we had to study a creator. And maybe this also kind of was
Mm.
influential in my Bitcoin journey because I chose Kathy Wood as my creator that I was going to study for a semester. And
Isn't that
her,
funny? Wow.
yeah. And so I
Why did you
really,
choose her out of interest?
I I think I was reading about ARC, and she'd been in the news a lot that spring when I was doing this. And I also really wanted to study a woman creator, and I kind of wanted to study someone who was living, and I don't know, she was just on my mind. I can't quite remember why. But her whole kind of theory about kind of the two sides of the coin of creative destruction and disruptive innovation, and just what is going to push the world forward. Um, and just so learning about that and innovation just generally, and also I had just done the certificate where I was the innovation strand. Um, and I've always considered myself someone who's not creative at all, but that was kind of the point of the course. They're like, we hope you've all kind of signed up for this because you all think you're not creative, but we're going to show you that you are. And so there's different ways to be creative, one being kind of creativity through combination. So anyways, I'm not sure how I got onto this tangent, but I studied her, and I think I gained an appreciation for questions over answers. How do we think differently? What are the different areas that we can combine to create something new? And so studying something that was very interdisciplinary, question focused. And so many people were telling me that they don't use their college degree, and so I was saying, okay, I want to try to use my college degree in some way. Um, and I originally started just computer science, and I was going to do Chinese studies as well. I was very into the AI ethics realm of, and I,
Hmm.
from learning Chinese, how you can kind of code ethics into a language. I wondered if you can do that through the computer language. Ultimately, I think the answer is no. I took a class on the psychology of language, but I think through Bitcoin, going back to the fact that it's like numbers are something everyone can understand. Bitcoin can be personalized to all 8 billion people. I think it can take the world further than language can. It's a way that, being a part of opting into the Bitcoin system, it's a way to tell people, no, I see you, I care about you, your goals matter to me. Um, Aligning to, no, I want to be behind something that supports human flourishing, protects privacy, freedom, liberty, property rights. I think that's almost a way that we can kind of get more further in the world than just language can. That was a little over the place. But anyways, that's why I'm studying cognitive science at school. So I will be starting a thesis next semester, I believe. Um, the actual topic is to be determined. But right now, I think there will be a very large kind of game theory element of it. I'm taking a game theory course right now, and not to go too into the weeds because my thoughts are still unrefined, but essentially how in finite games, you can't induce cooperation, but in an infinite game, you can induce cooperation. And I think Bitcoin is the first kind of infinite game that the world could play. And maybe there is a way that we can kind of align incentives and payoffs to kind of get to the box in the matrix that allows for cooperation. And so
What,
that kind of,
wait, can you
yeah.
explain this in a bit more detail? Why can't a
Yes, okay.
finite game induce cooperation? Because it's
Okay, so
zero sum.
yes. Yes and no. Okay, so let's just take the prisoner's dilemma, and maybe I'll, add some context. So the point with the prisoner's dilemma is basically that it's structured in a way where kind of each person has a dominant strategy, or they want to, rationalization is just doing what's in your own best interest. But when you individually do what's in your own best interest, as a whole, you do worse. That's kind of the point of, I'd say, the prisoner's dilemma. And what this means is that when you have a game that's going to be played for, let's say,
like for the, I know probably most people know what the prisoner's dilemma is, but just for the benefit of anyone listening that doesn't, can you just very briefly explain what it is so they've got context?
Yeah, so basically it's like, do you confess to the crime, or do you kind of not confess to the crime? And so basically it's set up where it's like, okay, if you cooperate with the jailer, like you're a prisoner, basically you've committed a crime. If you cooperate with the jailer, it's all about like how long will your term sentence be. Maybe we can add a link because it's much easier to see when you have like the actual matrix in front of you. But basically, you both should, basically act in a way where you will have like less time to serve. But if you don't want to serve, sorry, I'm doing a horrible job of explaining this without having the matrix. But I think that the main point, the reason it's a dilemma is because you can mutually do better if you choose one thing, but in an individual kind of mind frame, you will never choose that option because it's not in your own personal kind of benefit to do so.
Yeah, I think that's the point, isn't it? So the two prisoners, without knowing what the other one's going to do with the interrogator, if you like, if you dob the other one in or something like that, you then get less jail time. But if you both don't dob each other in, you collectively get even less jail time as a separate. But you can't know what the other person is going to do before you make your decision.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think if I'm remembering it rightly.
So if you work together, you have a lesser penalty that you encounter, and then if you're in your own self-interest, you have a greater penalty basically that you encounter than if you had just worked together. But how it's structured is that you will never play the strategy that means you're working together. So like you can see what the best option is, but you just won't get there when you're thinking about making the decision.
I think you don't get there though, because the reason is if the other person doesn't do the same thing, you end up worse off than if you'd acted in your own self-interest. And that's the dilemma. So it's like, do you act altruistically in the hope that they do the same and you're both better off? Or do you just assume that they're not going to be altruistic and so therefore you don't be altruistic, so you're okay, but you're not as in good a state as you would have been if you'd both been nice?
So I think I was trying to do this without making up an actual example, but I think I'll just make up an example to clear this all up. So basically, if you both stay quiet, which is what you should do, let's say you get like 2 years. But if you confess, like if I confess, but you stay silent, then I'll get 1 year and you'll get 8 years. And so it's a 2x2 box. So basically what you want to do is you both want to remain silent. But what ends up happening is that you both end up confessing because you're like, oh, I'll get less if I just confess. And then if you both confess, you both get 5 years, as an example. So individually, like that's how you get into this dilemma of you end up spending more time than if you had just cooperated to stay silent. I hope that maybe clears things up.
Yeah, that does.
Yes. So that's kind of the point there. But anyways, what happens is that when you have a finite game, there's some last period that you can work back on. So for instance, let's say in the last period, the person, whoever's making that last decision, since it's the last period, they're going to try and like one up you or try to get ahead on you. They're going to go for getting that like extra dollar or basically making you worse off. So if you know in the last period that someone else is going to kind of act poorly against you, then what are you going to do in the period before that? You're going to act poorly against them because it's in your interest to try to protect yourself. And you know they're not going to act nicely towards you, so you're not going to act nicely towards them. And so this is called backward induction. Basically, when you have some last period to work from, you can go backwards into figuring out what people will do in the first period. And I can explain that again if I didn't do a good job of doing that. But
no,
essentially, Yeah, so essentially you get to, okay, if I know in like the 10th period they're going to do this, then the ninth period I'm going to do that. And you work all the way back into the first period and you end up into you encounter the dilemma where you're not going to cooperate. Um, and so this logic happens when you have a finite game. When you have an infinite game, there is no last period to work back from. And so you can't do that backwards induction there. But there's another strategy, and also I'll preface to any game theory people out there, maybe I get something a little wrong. But when you have an infinite game, you can there's another concept that comes in called the trigger strategy, which basically just means, we're going to cooperate, but if you go off and do some self-serving thing, well, then from here on out, I'm going to not cooperate with you anymore. So it's like you're going to initiate the trigger, and then you'll both end up in a worse off period. So that's kind of the point there. So Bitcoin, I think, is an infinite game where everyone can figure out a way to cooperate. Just like we've all seen kind of the Trojan horse Bitcoin meme graphic. And so I think, Bitcoin, you can be entirely self-serving and participate in Bitcoin, and it supports everyone else that uses Bitcoin and is involved in the ecosystem. So this is like very early stages thinking. I'm not sure exactly what this will go into, and I'll work on it for a year and a half or so. But that's the current topic area that I'm finding really interesting.
That's fascinating. That's going to be an incredible thesis. I'm assuming that goes out publicly, like people can access it when it's complete. Is that right?
I hope so. Yes,
You could do
I hope so. I don't know.
You could do a Jason Lowry, publish it as a book.
Yeah.
Before
Yes.
it gets marked or whatever, publish it as a book, and then when it gets out, you can put it out as a PDF, and then ask your university if they'll write a thing saying you're not allowed to share it with anyone because it's too high of a security risk for the homeland security, and then your book will just sell out.
Yeah. Yes.
That's the marketing strategy. Gosh, that's amazing. Like, wow, you have like an incredible mind. It's just fascinating, like the stuff that you're delving into. No, I mean, seriously, it's really interesting talking to you, and I feel like I could do it for hours. So I'm going to go and look up the stuff that you mentioned, like the podcast, the What Bitcoin Did podcast, and listen to that. And then I'll probably have more questions for you. But just before we sign off, I just wanted to ask, could you share your social media handles with everybody, where they can find you, where they can read your stuff? And I'll obviously put it in the show notes, but if you could just share that verbally as well, that'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. On Twitter, you can just find me at 21 million MM for the 21st. Because I think Bitcoin is 21 million tools for the 21st century. And then I also have a link tree. It's just linktree/Ella Hough. And that links to my website, writings, my blog. So that's kind of the hub of everything.
Did you edit your Noster thing so it's correct on
I
the
did.
thing now?
Yes,
You did.
I did.
Okay.
Yes, thank you
Perfect.
for letting me know. Yes,
that's right. Yeah, but I'll
now.
just share that. I just wanted to make sure that it was correct, because if there's any Noster people out there, I'm sure they would love to follow you on there as well. Well, thank you again. I think I would love to have you back on at some point, just because there's so much more to delve into. So I'm going to look at the material that you've suggested and read a bit more, and I'm going to have a whole bunch of other questions for you. In the meantime, like, best of luck with your studies. Best of luck with your attempts at orange pilling. Don't give up.
No, I won't.
We're just early and it will happen, so please don't give up. And thank you for everything that you're doing for your generation, because it's really heartwarming to kind of meet people your age who are just so eloquent and thoughtful and have such a deep understanding of Bitcoin and such a desire to share that knowledge. I mean, it's really meaningful that you're in the communities that you're in and you're doing what you're doing. So as soon as you've got your Bitcoin Student Network up and running, the website, let me know, because I might be in time to add it to the show notes as well before we put this out. So because I would love to promote that with students
as well, so it'll be there. But thank you so much, Krista. Yes.
No, thank you. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know you. I'm so glad that your mum suggested we do this. So we will definitely do it again. And thanks again, Ella. And thank you just for everything that you're doing.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for all you're doing.